Well, I can remember when I first, accepted Christ into my life, okay? My understanding of the good news at that point was that I was pretty much just a sinner. And my sin separated me from God because God's so holy and righteous and he can't stand sin. And so Jesus came and took my place and basically took my punishment for my sins so that I wouldn't have to die. And so if I trusted him, then I'd get to live forever. And so I was very happy about that, and it did change my life to a great degree, because now I wasn't living with the fear of death, and I wasn't living with all the guilt. But for a long, long time, I still felt the shame. And added to that shame was the fact that I was so bad that Jesus had to go to the cross, and then the fear that the Father was still disappointed with me because I still sinned, So I had the concept that my past was forgiven, but every time I sinned, I came back under that guilt and condemnation and shame. And so I tried real hard not to sin. Of course, the harder I tried, how that goes. And so I just never really felt confident in my relationship with God. I felt like he was always disappointed with me. And that put me on the try harder treadmill for a good part of my journey early on.
I was raised in the church. I was raised in a pretty religious tradition, lots of ritual. And I really thought life was about being smart. That's pretty much how I defined doing well, was by being smart. And that's how we got power in my house. And my dad, when my dad died, we stopped going to church. And I had made a decision at that point that I didn't believe in God. I really believed there was too much evil. I couldn't explain how there could be a good God. How does that happen? And then I came to a belief because I couldn't explain the origin of goodness.
When I was younger, the good news didn't sound like good news to me. In fact, it sounded kind of horrific. My dad was a minister, and this is not to say anything bad about my dad, but being a minister and in a church that was prided themselves on being the church. He would stand behind the pulpit, and a lot of times what I remember is seeing as a red-faced preacher, just, hammering it home. So God was kind of a scary thing, and the good news was more like bad news.
I remember the first time I heard Renee teaching on that, she was like, you're not a sinner saved by grace, but you're a lover of God who just happens to sin. And I looked at her and thought, blasphemy! Aren't we all sinners? And and I'm serious. It was so offensive to me, because I'm like, how she was saying, and you're perfect. What do you mean? Look at this. You're calling this perfect? Are you crazy? And I was so offended by that when I left that night, because there was a lot of things, quite honestly, in Be Transformed that offended me, because I found the more I was offended, the more God was showing me what my false beliefs were. And at first I was like really mad because I was getting offended, and then I started saying, hey, that offense is a red flag that there's a lie there. So I started embracing the offense, going, okay, obviously I'm not believing something that's right. And that was one of the first times when I walked out of group going, I'm just not too sure about this. I just don't know about this, because now she's telling me I'm not a sinner and that I'm perfect. And the only person that was ever not a sinner and perfect was Christ. And I had a real big issue with that.
The good news to me is freedom. I really believe he died to set us free. He died for freedom.
When he died, it was to release me. It was a freedom that was given. And that has really become good news. The more I relax, the more I let him do what he does best in me and through me, it is good news.
God got a hold of me and he was just like, Tina, this is true. You are no longer a sinner saved by grace, but you're a lover of God. And you happen to deal with sin. You know, sin is alive in this physical body of yours, and you live in this world that's full of it. And you've got an old way of programming, a way of thinking that makes you revert back to thoughts and ideas that just aren't true, that will draw you into sin. But that's not who you are.
Now it reminds me not that I was a sinner and Jesus had to take my punishment, but it shows me how much God loves me, that He's willing to lay down His own life to free me from sin's destruction. And it's not that God was ever mad at me because of my sins. It was He wanted to free me from sin because it destroys me, the object of His love and affection.
And I'm really seriously believing now that this comes first, and He wins that love, that heart connection first, and that changes your thinking. And it was for freedom from not just the law. My big thing up here that I share with people is color by numbers. We want to color. I don't know if you grew up doing that, but when we were kids, we'd buy these little kits, and they come with pictures, and they come with numbers, and the numbers are attached to a color, and you got to follow the directions. And He came, and it was promised from the beginning, real life, and real life is not coloring by numbers.
The more patient I became with myself, and the more patient that I perceived God being, I began to see the good news differently. I began to see it more like really good news. And the good news was that it was about Jesus and not me.